welcome back to a brand new painting lesson. Here today we are going to be working on this lovely spring scene. Have a lot of detail in the water, this very atmospheric, wonderful canopying set of trees. I'm really excited about this, really excited about just getting back to a green palette for the year. As you can see, the canvas does have an underpainting. It's fully dry and we sketched on our image. This is an 8 by 10 inch canvas, and this underpainting is just with a blue. You could use an ultramarine, a cerulean, but the whole idea here is that this is going to create an undertone, which will make all of our greens look a little bit cooler, and it'll just make everything look really nice and cohesive, kind of atmospheric. I'm excited about this. If you would like help with the drawing process, I do have a real-time sketching video of me doing all of this little line work, talking about the composition up over on Patreon. So you can either download the traceable up there, use a projector to put it onto the canvas, use a tracing paper. You could freehand sketch it with me, but if you do want that extra content, it is up over on Patreon. And today we're going to do the full painting together. So I'm looking forward to this. I think we'll start here with the larger flat-headed brush in the sky. As you can see, it's a very grayed out sky, and I like that because it's not too bright, but it also creates a nice contrast with the rest of the scene. Typically, we want something that does give us enough of a pop, and I think because we have the dark darts through here, we don't need anything too bright up here. So it's not a pure titanium white. It'll probably have some of our blue in it as well, and we'll just move this perhaps over here for now, that way you can still see it. We'll move our extra brushes. And by the way, if you're interested in the brushes, I will have a link in the description to this brush set. I've used these for the last, I want to say 2.5 years at this point. It is my brush set. I use it for all of the lessons here on this channel. And I think there are only 20-ish left in stock. So if you want it, would recommend picking it up now. But with that, if you like these lessons, I do use it for all of them. So if you pick up this singular set, you'll know you'll have everything you need for all of my videos, and it should keep things easy. That said, we are starting in the sky. I am starting by making my brush nice and damp. That will keep our paint wet for a longer period of time. We'll grab our titanium white and a good abundance of it. Move that to a clean spot on the palette. We'll grab a hint of our Oxide black, and I do mean a hint. So I just use a corner of the brush and I take the excess off. Then we'll grab a hint of our ultramarine blue and we'll work these all together into this nice grayish blue. It's not too bright. It's not wholly desaturated. And we're just going to work that up into the sky, keeping in mind where the trees are going to be. You can see that I will cover up a good portion of our sketches, and that's okay because we can always resketch it. If you are up over on Patreon, then you can use the picture or the video to resketch yours as we go. But I'm a big believer in sketching things multiple times for the sake of really understanding them. So I never mind if I cover up a sketch. Though we might leave little portions unfinished like this, just so I have an idea of where that subject is. Make our lives a little bit easier in the near future. And I also like starting with the backgrounds like this because it's just such an easy warm-up. You don't have to worry about getting everything perfect. And you can kind of just get the rust off. I think for a lot of us, starting is the hardest part. And if we are starting on something really simple like the sky, it's not intimidating, and so we actually do start. You know? That said, I'm going to do a second layer up here, just make it nice and thick. The thinner it is, the more blue you'll see through it. So that it is a preference thing, and we do have the blue on there for a reason. I do want that to show through to a point, but I also just want to make sure we're working with enough. Also using the larger flat-headed brush to begin because it can carry so much pigment. You can see just how quickly we're getting all of this on the canvas. Makes it nice and easy. We have some branches coming in here. There we go. And we're really just taking our time settling into the painting process. We're not in any rush. We're here to sit down, relax, make something, be creative, and enjoy the process. You know, it's not always about the end result. Sometimes it's about the joy of painting, and that in itself is pretty wonderful. So right now we have this kind of interesting abstract shape going on. I'm trying to create this little extension right down here, and I'm trying to make that a little bit deeper in our painting. That way the eye follows the light down into the center of the canvas. So we're trying to keep in mind compositional elements like this throughout the painting process, trying to create leading lines. A lot of this does kind of push the eye downwards, but I want the eye to really fall into the middle of the canvas. So we do have some exposed sky throughout, but these areas are important. Now I think we'll work on the trees in the very far distance. So just a couple right through here. You can see that this open area is where they'll reside, and we can start with a more complex mix. I'm still going to use some blue in it, despite the fact that they're trees, because we will have these atmospheric reflections. We'll grab some of our sap green because it is a green, it is a tree. We want it to be pretty desaturated. We don't want a lot of hue, so I'll grab a little bit of our oxide black, our titanium white, and our first mix here should be a mid-value green, something that's not too bright nor too dark, something we can add highlights to but also shadows, and I think this is actually pretty perfect. So I'm going to begin very simply by just crafting a couple of these protruding shapes, and these won't really look like trees upon the initial application. We're not looking to render details at this point. We are just looking to render the general shape and the feel of it. And I think that's great. As we start to get towards the bottom, I want to make it a little bit darker, because the farther down a subject is from the light, the darker it'll be. It'll start casting shadows upon itself. And this is a really easy way of creating some depth. Now we have a gradient from this mid-value green to a little bit of a darker green, and we'll darken it one more time for the very bottom. I'm also okay if we leave brush strokes, because that's just going to be nice texture in the painting. So, off to a good easy start right there. Next, we are going to create a little bit more detail, and we'll switch on over to our liner brush. Fantastic for intentional work. I'm going to make it nice and damp, which will, again, kind of continue to increase the wet life of our paint so we can blend, but also it'll condense the bristles so we can make a smaller, sharper marking. Now we'll grab some of the highlighted pigment that we used along the sides, or around the top, and we will use it on the sides. Just create some little protrusions, and that means pushing the paint outwards, creating the minute little branches which find their way into the open space, like so. And I think we actually need to mix up a bit more paint for that, so we'll do so. Sap green, a little bit of our ultramarine, a little bit of our oxide black, good amount of our titanium white. Always tried to leave hints of past mixes around, and this is the mix initially, right around the corner, right around the edge. So that's what I'm trying to copy and mix too. Makes it a lot easier to remix pigments if there's still a little bit on your palette, even if it's dry, just for the sake of the visual reference. And I think that's pretty close. So again, we're going to go back. We're going to create these protrusions. Oh yeah, there we go. That's pretty perfect. We want these to be really tiny, if we can make them so. We want them to be evolving and different, so we have a lot of little ones. Here's a random big one. And that's going to make it a whole lot more interesting. It's also worth noting that a lot of the branches towards the top are going to be pushing upwards. Oh my. And towards the middle, it'll move horizontally. Now, if you hear me laughing, if you hear something in the background, you wonder, what might that be? I believe that is the subtle, tranquil, beautiful sound of a jackhammer. I'm currently in the process of moving because I like to film these relaxing painting videos, and there is a large construction project that is occurring. You know what? I will record this in a second. I apologize. Oh, perhaps it stopped? Okay, maybe we'll continue. Shall we? We'll take a little break. Okay, so we're back. Again, apologies about that. I was just saying that we are actually moving this month because there started to be quite a bit of construction outside of our condo, and I really like to make these lessons as relaxing and tranquil as I can, and I find it pretty tricky working around the construction times. So after this month, everything should be quiet and serene and all of the things you want our painting tutorials to be. But for the next 3-ish weeks, while I'm moving, it might be a little bit here and there. And I do apologize about that. I will try to work around those sounds, but really appreciate all of you who are patient and are here regardless. Thank you for being just such a wonderful, dedicated member of the community who, can look past the occasional jackhammering in the background, which sounds like a funny thing to say, again, for a painting lesson, but truly, thank you for just understanding and still being here. I think right now it sounds pretty decent, so we'll continue to try to do some real painting. And right now I'm going back into some of these branches and I'm just doing little taps to add some extra detail to the edges, make them nice and full branches. Towards the top, a lot of them will move upwards. Towards the middle, they'll start to move horizontally. And then towards the bottom, we don't have any examples here yet because we can't really see the bottom of the trees, but it starts to move down because of the weight of the branches. But I really like this as a base layer. I think it looks good. And for our next layer, we are going to work in some shadows into these spaces. And the easiest way to do that is to take your larger flat-headed brush, make a slightly, and I do mean slightly, we don't want this to be a lot darker, a slightly darker mixture of your green. So we'll just add in a little bit of oxide black here and there. We'll work that out to be quite thin. And you can see the variance of what we were just working with versus the new color. Then we're going to switch to a different brush, that being our stiff bristled fan brush. And this is great because it can deliver so many little markings all at once. We're not going to wet this because we don't want to condense the bristles. Instead, we'll just grab some pigment on both sides. Then we're going to head into here and we'll try to tap on some shadowy texture. You can see that I'm going to rotate my brush throughout the process, and I can already tell I think I want there to be a little bit more actual pigment. There's quite a bit of water in this mix, and because of that I'm not getting opaque taps, and we can fix that pretty easily by just mixing in more paint. So there's a greater paint to water ratio, and this should render much more markings, and it already is. So here, as you can see, we're just tapping in literal shadows, and towards the top, so that these don't protrude too far outwards, I'm going in with a vertical tap to work my way up. But when we get towards the central areas, I try to make them a bit more diagonal, a bit more randomized. We also do a lot of horizontal ones because realistically there are going to be some lines that are shown in the end, and if they are, we want them to be more horizontal because the tree branches and limbs will be horizontal, and therefore the shadows underneath them will also be horizontal. So we're just trying to anticipate where subjects will be and work within that idea. Now, as you can see, this is also very quick. I love working with a fan brush because it just saves me hours of time and tapping. If you wanted to do this or something similar with the liner brush, it would take days. And you also wouldn't be able to get this small of a marking because right now we're putting in impressions with individual bristles where even the smaller liner brush, even this guy, would render much larger markings because it's an amalgam of bristles in the tap. So we want something that renders as little an impression as possible. And you can see that we're going back over a couple areas numerous times. We can, much like we did with the actual tree, the backing, we can make the mix a little bit darker for the taps at the bottom. Make those shadows a little bit deeper, a little bit more heavy in the contrast. But we don't want it to be too dark, we don't want it to be a pure oxide black, because realistically, we want to save those darker values for our foreground subjects. And we'll get to those pretty soon. But right now, I think this is actually a pretty great base for our backing trees. Now we need to add on our highlights, and to do that, we're going to let it dry fully. In the meantime, I'm just going to clean my brushes and my water. This shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll jump into the next step together. But so far, so good. Okay, so we're back. Everything is nice and dry to the touch. So we are going to begin working on the highlights in these trees back here. They're quite subtle, you can barely see them, but it will add an extra element of depth. And often when you want to create a lot of depth in these pieces, you want to add layers of values, so darker colors, lighter. The larger the range, the more realistic it'll look, though in the distance they're often less dramatic ranges than what you see in the foreground. So in the background, things kind of have this hazy wash over them, something that's more affected by atmospheric light and the sky and all of the reflective colors, where the foreground you see like the real darks, the real innate pigments. So we're trying to keep that in mind. We want to keep this highlight subtle, but we will start by mixing it right beside our previous pigments. Titanium white, a little bit of sap green, a little bit of ultramarine. This though is far too bright. We need to desaturate it. Take that hue out to a point, add in some oxide black, and this already I think is really nice because it is definitely a desaturated variant of what we have right here. It's too bright and it does need a little bit more blue because it is still in the distance. So we'll just work that in, and I think this is actually beautiful. That's a lovely color right there. Now we can apply this either with that same fan brush, or we can do it with the liner. I think I'm going to start with the liner, see how I feel. And with this, we'll actually start more so in the middle, just to see the variance in an area that's a little bit more safe than the top, because we can cover this up a bit easier without expanding upon the actual subject. And I can already tell I love this. It's so subtle, but it does add that extra element of highlight. And my job right here, my goal, is to avoid a lot of the shadowy areas and place this on the tops of the mid values. So the original application, I would call our mid values. The second application, the shadows, is what we're avoiding. And again, if there's an open area, then I want to apply it to the top of that open area, leaving the middle. That way it's almost like a progression of light, where light is coming down, it's hitting the top of the branch, doing the highlight that we're doing right now, and then there's that mid value right underneath, the first thing we applied, and then there's the shadow underneath that. And then it resets where it's highlight, mid value, shadow, etc. So that's what we're doing. These markings are a little bit bigger because we are using the liner brush, but I'm okay with that because these are markings that are protruding, they're catching light, they're standing out. I want them to be a bit more dominant than the shadow hues and values. So far I love it. One of those things where it's quickly coming together, we are quickly being rewarded. And with acrylics, it's kind of rare, to be honest. With acrylics, I feel like it's a lot of building up layers, building your foundations, and we are still far from anything conclusive or finished, but I think there's a lot to feel proud of and excited about already. And I love that. Love the early successes. Now we could make this whole process a whole lot faster if we switched to the fan brush. And just for the sake of showing you the process, I think we will do that for a little bit. I'm going to mix up more paint because we don't really have that much, and the fan brush is a pretty big brush. You can see I'm mixing it in with the previous mix, but I'm leaving a little bit at the top so that I have a reference point for what it needs to look like in the end. There we go. Also, can we all just take a second to appreciate how quiet it is outside right now? And we weren't loud for too long, and I appreciate that. I'll also note that I really like watching construction, which I know is a strange thing to comment on, but I think I just like watching things being built. I'm curious about the foundations and the materials and just the processes. I think a lot of artists can actually probably resonate with these ideas. So I like the idea of watching it, and I kind of would get excited crossing different construction sites across Toronto. But I think when we're trying to record, it's a little tricky. So again, we think we found an area, a space that won't be too loud, but it's still in Toronto. So we're where we want to be, but the video should get even better, and I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be a bit of a crazy month. The moves always are, but this should be really, really good. Trying to find some extra space for the canvases that we have too many of. I have a wall right now of big ones, little ones. I was thinking about making a tier on Patreon actually, where if you subscribe at, will probably be a pretty high tier, but the idea would be every month I would put out 5 or 10 paintings that I've done, and then you could know which one you wanted, and I would send you that one that month. And every month you would get a painting from the collection, and you could get a bunch of different ones, or you can get ones that kind of work together, and you could put 2 or 3 in a room and, you know, create something cohesive within the space, get different ones for different seasons. I think it would be fun. I think that I'd like to start getting the artwork out there, and I feel like this community has been so wonderful and supportive, and I feel like I'd like to start doing that here with you, because I feel like your support with the channel has just meant so much, and if I can create something like that, a system that you like, then I think everything's just in a great place. So let me know what you think about that idea. We are going to move to the trees towards the left here. These are a little bit different. As you can see, they have more contrast than the ones to the right of them. So darker darks, slightly more saturated bright hues, and we're going to continue working our way towards the left. So we have a pretty big area to cover. We'll need a good amount of pigment. We'll start by mixing up another mid value. We're going to use slightly less of our blue than we did last time because we're moving farther away from the distance. So less atmospheric light, less reflective light, but it's still at this point a part of it. So we're still using some of the blue, just more green in general ratio-wise. And we're just going to work background to foreground with this painting. I think it'll be really, really nice. I can also show you how to add a bright, kind of hazy look to it once we finish this set of trees, and it'll put these things in the background, it'll create extra depth, it'll look pretty ethereal, so a lot to look forward to. That said, I think this mix is pretty good. It's a little bit darker than the highlights we had here, which we want, but it's also more saturated, and it's brighter than the mid value that we had there, which is really the important thing we're comparing with right now. So we start at the tops of our trees, typically with something that's a bit vertical, right? And then lots of diagonal taps. You can see that these are for the most part moving upwards like that, and then again towards the middle they get more horizontal and they start to work downwards, but those applications don't matter too much right now because all we're really creating contrast with and variance in is the tops. And these of course don't have to be too dramatic, they can be pretty loose because we are going to refine it all with the liner brush shortly anyway. And we'll come down here, have some overlap with these trees. Overlapping your trees is something I think a lot of beginner artists struggle with the idea of because it's something that, ooh, this is getting really bright really quickly. Let's make that a bit darker again. It's something that a lot of beginner artists I think struggle with the idea of because they're afraid things will get too messy. And that can happen, but I would say the overlap is really important for realism. By the way, we're now incorporating a darker pigment towards the bottom, create that contrast, same as we did with these backing trees, except the darker pigments will now be a little bit darker than they were before. And again, brush strokes are more than okay. Little patches of various colors and values are also okay, as it'll just make it more interesting. I think we want more trees back here. Again, just getting the bases in before we commit to details. But again, what we were talking about was overlapping of trees. Yes, it can look messy if done in a very uncontrolled way or a very unintentional way. But the reality is, in real life, in forests, trees, nature, they grow in front of each other. There are visual obstructions, and if you don't have them, I think it ends up looking a lot more unrealistic than it would otherwise. So sometimes the realism is worth the, quote-unquote messiness. So don't worry too much about that. If you need to simplify after the fact, you can. I think this is looking pretty good. Again, we want to start working into a darker hue, and it's also worth noting right under the trees, right through here, it's really dark, and I'd like to apply that now. There's a hill, which you can see through the back here. When we zoom out, you can really see it right there. You can see my line for it right here. This is going to have some highlight on the top because it's protruding. It's going to catch a little more light, then it'll get darker down here. But the real dark area is right through this area. So we're going to implement that. It's a lot of sap green, a little bit of the oxide black. Just like so. I'll just bring that all the way to here. And this is an area where there's a lot of shadows. It's also relatively close to us, so we can see the darker, more oxide black heavy greens in a way that we can't in the background because it doesn't have that atmospheric light. That said, now we want to overlay some of our greens on top. And oh, that's a new sound outside. It's not a jackhammer, but it's something. Perhaps a saw? Perhaps I finish this clip in a minute once it subsides. I'm just going to quickly do a little bit more here while it's all still wet. Work these trees and turn the branches down. and we're going to create little clusters of branches. So like this over the darker area, it's just some spots, some tapping, and that way we don't have a hard line between this open area and our trees. We just want it to look realistic, like we have some protruding branches. There can be overlap, they can be messy. You just want it to look like they are working their way down. And I think honestly that right there is pretty great. So at this point, let's see, is this dry? It's pretty close to dry actually. We can probably continue just working along. And that means working in the shadows for these. It's very similar to our process here. But you know what? Before we do that, maybe we extend all of the branches to be something a bit more unique and interesting. So let's actually create more of the same color or something very similar to it. So lots of sap green, a little bit of the oxide black, good amount of the titanium white, nothing too bright, nothing too dark. I think this is similar. Do a little test. Needs to be a little brighter. Friendly reminder, you can always test directly on your canvas. And there we go. That's essentially our color. It's not a bad idea to occasionally just put paint there rather than continuously guessing and mixing on your palette. Sometimes they're a lot closer than you think, and sometimes just putting it on top of a previous area will really help you solidify your direction and ideas and just help you get there a lot faster. It might mean putting the wrong color down on a previously nice area, and that's okay because we can just cover it up with more paint once we have the right color. So don't fear that. I think once you get comfortable with color matching and mixing in art, you start to paint much more quickly and confidently because you're not afraid that you're doing the wrong thing all the time, and you can act with confidence until you get to what you actually want. And I think it feels like a real superpower in art once you get there. So do feel welcome to mix on your canvas and like try to do that color matching there once you feel like you have a good idea of it on your palette. Now here, we're still just doing a lot of upward taps. There we go. This really is getting me excited for spring. We've had Fool's Spring a couple of times here in Toronto where it felt like summer and it was wonderful, and then all of a sudden there was a blizzard. Happened actually over the weekend where it was blizzarding one day after it was nice, and then the next day was 17 degrees and it was warm, and it was, you know, one of those things where like, maybe I'll go in a t-shirt. So it's been a ride, but I think it just gets me more and more excited for these bright, or not even bright, because this scene isn't that bright, but these scenes that have real life in them, right? I think that's a big thing with spring. Spring isn't always the brightest season. It isn't always doesn't have the widest variety of colors, but the colors that are there are very lush, they're fresh, they make you feel alive. And I think that's really what we're going for in this scene. It's not a lot of color, but the color that will be here is going to make you feel like you're at the start of something, and it's kind of rejuvenating a little bit. That's the idea anyway. Now, I think I'll just put a little bit more pigment of what we have on the brush on the palette. Continue to work these out. This will be towards the bottom of a tree that's a bit closer to us, so my markings are more so going downwards rather than up, or to the side. Here, maybe it is more towards the side because we're getting more towards the center, the midsection of the tree. But a lot of this down here is kind of being pushed down. There we go. think it's also worth noting. I was talking earlier about, you know what, actually we'll touch on that in a second. I like the edges for this. I think they're pretty good. We could definitely refine them and make them a little better, but I think we'll do that in a later layer. So right now we'll mix up the shadow pigment for the details and the shadows, and then we'll start on that. Then we'll have the other conversation. So we'll just grab a little bit of our Oxide black, sap green. You also don't have to use sap green, by the way. If you want to make this more of a summer setting, if you did a cerulean blue base and then you did your greens with a green gold, it would look like a really warm summery piece. And that could be pretty beautiful. That said, right now I'm just mixing up the shadows for inside these trees. You can see they're not really that dark. If you look at the darks here in comparison to the darks with the foreground, it's a dramatic difference. So make sure that this has a lot of room to get brighter, because it will need to in the near-ish future. I think this would be a really good dark pigment. We'll apply it with the fan brush. Make sure that your fan brush is nice and dry. And we'll go in again with vertical taps for the tops of these, and then more horizontal when we get into the larger body, very similar to what we did in the distance. And at this point, you should be warmed up for this technique and probably feel pretty good going into it, pretty confident. Already, I think this is looking pretty good. That said, what I wanted to talk about was, we were referencing what I was thinking about doing with my paintings on Patreon and sending those out to subscribers at a new tier. I haven't made it yet, so if you go there and you're looking for it, coming soon, and I'll do an announcement for it. But for those of you who do these paintings and you're not sure what to do with them, maybe you do them for the sake of learning or relaxing, sometimes I get the question of, am I okay to sell this acrylic paintings based off of your work? And I wanted to say, you are always more than welcome to sell your paintings based off of my tutorials and acrylic lessons specifically. Sometimes I'll do like an oil painting, and those are more passion projects. Those are more from me, and those I would request that you don't sell remakes or renditions of. But when it comes to these acrylic lessons, which is pretty much what I've done on the channel for the last couple of years, please feel welcome to do that. If acrylic is in the title or description, then I really don't mind, and please feel comfy in that. Some people also offer to give me credit when they're selling them. They say, oh, it was from a Stay Creative lesson. You don't have to do that. It's wonderful when you do, but don't feel the need or pressured. If you just want to say, hey, you know what, I made this painting and I put this time into it and I really love it, then I'm okay with that. The goal of this channel, in a lot of ways, is to help you feel comfortable and confident as an artist, and that isn't just in terms of technique. I would love it if you also felt like you were able to put your paintings in some other homes and just get artwork out there. I think we're all big lovers of the traditional medium that is acrylic and canvas and paint, and I just love the idea that you are also keeping it alive, making people's day, creating scenes that we can all get lost in and appreciate. So feel welcome to sell your renditions, and no, you do not need to give the channel credit. You're welcome to, but you don't have to. I just thank you for being here. I thank you for being a part of the community. I thank you for watching the videos and commenting and liking the videos and doing all the different things that you do to help keep this channel up and doing well. Also, again, I say this all the time and I will say it all the time, big thank you to everybody up over on Patreon for literally making this channel what it is. These longer videos, I know, are not ideal for the algorithms. If I wanted the videos with the millions of views, I think we do much shorter condensed videos, probably to music, and it's a time lapse, but I don't want to do that. I want to have a conversation, and I want to teach, and I want to make art with you. And it means making, you know, to be honest, a lot less money here on YouTube. But it's about having these real conversations and creating a wonderful creative community. And because of the people up over on Patreon who are directly supporting the channel, we can do that. And I thank you endlessly for this opportunity to make art and have these conversations and do these long form videos. There we go. I think this is a really good base. I'm just going to go back and do a little bit more through some central areas. I might also intentionally create some horizontal markings for larger under branches. But for the most part, I think this is really strong. We're going to want to let this dry a little bit, and then we can kind of come back in with some highlights. But I think I also want to make the mix slightly darker. So just adding in a little bit more of the oxide black. And I'll do that towards the bottom of the trees, and we'll just expand upon those shadows. Make them a bit deeper, maybe more akin to what we have under through there. So the shadows kind of get lost in the other shadows. And I think that'll create a lot of additional ambiguity and depth. Yeah, already that looks so much better. I like that a lot. And now, the top has probably had a good amount of time to dry. It has. No wet paint. We love it. I think I'll start working on the highlight, go back to the top, and start there. So while I do that, I'd also like to note, if you're new here, this is your first time watching, we did just talk a little bit about Patreon, and I'll tell you just a little bit about it. Up there, you can watch the ad-free version of these videos. So if you're watching on YouTube right now and there are ads, you don't have to watch those. You can also get the traceable for this, which is the sketch. So you can either put that on tracing paper or projector, or you can watch the real-time drawing video, which I uploaded to Patreon exclusively, and you can just draw it along with me, where I also talk about composition, and we have more of these chats. Up there you can also get all of my ebooks, which includes Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. It's everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. We talk about composition, different color palettes, what brushes I like to use, how to work with water, glazing, all of that. And before we continue this conversation, I want highlights on here, but I don't want them to be hyper saturated. You can see in the foreground we have really saturated greens. Up here, we don't. They're highlighted, they're brighter than anything we have here, but they're still pretty subtle, and I think I want something like this where it's more titanium white in the mix and not too much of our sap green. So do try to keep that at a place where there is room for more saturation growth through the process. I'm also going to start here with the larger fan brush, because this is a pretty big area and doing it with the liner exclusively would be dramatic. So I think we'll start with this, and then we'll switch to the liner when we want to refine areas. Now I'm beginning with a lot of horizontal markings towards the top, but as you can see, this is essentially just branches protruding. And some fun designs you can start to create are little triangles, and I'll show you what I mean with the liner brush, just for the sake of explanation. We're going to grab this, and towards the top, again, branches move upwards because they're pretty light, so we can do lots of little taps here and then taps coming down, but that makes it look like this area is protruding upwards and then it's coming back in. And if we do that towards the center, of our tree, we make it look like there are branches moving outwards, not just to the left and right. So it just makes it significantly more dynamic, like so. See that? Pretty pretty. I think we could also go a little bit brighter with these highlights, but I want to get this layer on first, and then we can expand later should we want to. Also, I said we would start with the fan brush, and we were, but I think I'm getting pretty comfy with the liner, so I might personally continue, but you are more than welcome to use either brush. Both of them work. This just takes a bit more time and gives you a bit more intentionality. But realistically, there isn't a wrong way to do this. It's personal preference. And sometimes, often, using both is ideal, and I'll probably go back and forth. You know what, maybe we'll get you a bit closer, and then we'll continue. Now, I think, prior to this little deep dive, we were talking about Patreon and what we're doing up there. It's also worth noting, I do these larger canvas series, where maybe it's on a 24 by 24 inch canvas, a 24 by 36, but if you like to work on much larger canvases, there are series exclusively up there for that. And we have quite a few of them. We have some waterfalls, some vast landscapes, serene little river. I'm currently working on an interesting project where it's going to be a similar composition to Bob Ross landscapes, but done with acrylics, because often the oil and acrylic applications aren't, they don't really work in the same way. So you want to approach them differently. And I want to do this little series where it's like creating a Bob Ross painting, but with more realism and with acrylics. And the idea isn't that we're doing it better or anything. It's more so just you approach it differently, you incorporate more acrylic techniques, we add more detail, and I think we can create something really, really interesting, and I think it'll be a fun challenge. So that's something we're working on right now. Typically these lessons are 10, 12, maybe up to 20 hours, even for the really big ones. So what you're watching right now here on YouTube, these are the 2 to 4 hour lessons, but if you want like a really big canvas with a deep dive, that's what we're doing up there typically. So if you're interested in the big canvases, the ebooks, the traceables, the bonus videos, would recommend checking it out. I also have a reward where for some of you, we also put the names at the end of the video, so if you've ever stuck around till the end of the video, there's a little thank you page, and that's for the big supporter tiers. So if you'd like to kind of be in these videos forever as a patron, that's an option. I really, really appreciate that. And now, again, I'm working on a tier where you can actually receive these paintings. And the painting you're watching right now will be in that as well. So if you want to own this little guy, you will have that opportunity as well. It's worth noting that the applications here towards the bottom are getting more sparse, and they really stand out because we're putting this onto a darker backdrop than this, so they stand out quite nicely, which means we want to be more attentive with this area. I'm creating lots of little clusters, so here's a cluster, here's a cluster. They kind of still create lines in a lot of cases, but we're just looking for the ends of branches which protrude out from the shadows of the other branches, catch a light, and it's a lot of amalgamated taps rather than brush strokes. We can do brush strokes, and here I'll do a couple just for the sake of showing you. We're connecting these areas, we'll connect these areas, maybe they'll connect up to these, but for the most part it's taps, and then at the end, if you want, you can connect them via brush strokes for the sake of filling out an area and making it feel a bit more full. But you can also do that through just doing more taps that eventually make it feel full, right? So different ways of going about it. These highlights will also help differentiate these trees from these trees, and that's important. The farther away the tree, the less of these connected clusters, details you'll see, but we will still have them to a point. I think that looks great. There we go. And now we'll start working on these trees right here. Because this one's farther away, it has less, so I'm going to try to be less linear with my markings, create less clusters. Still using the liner brush. It does take more time than the fan brush, but again, I'm honestly just having a lot of fun with it, so I don't mind taking the extra time. I think that already looks really good. Didn't take a lot. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a couple little highlights here and there. Make it all happen. Now this one's a little bit different because we have branches that are bigger, they're closer, and they're moving towards us. So this is going to be interesting. I'll grab some pigment, and I could tell that there was an area that kind of comes down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these tap and drag effects. So it's a tap and then a little bit of a drag. And then I create this bumpy branch which comes down. And then there are lots of little taps at the end of all of these larger areas. And they create little highlights, protrusions, pieces, which show scale. Because the larger some strokes are in relation to the smaller ones, the more volume you can show in a subject, the more scale. It's that variance and that contrast which really sells the painting in its scale. So here we're going out into this larger negative space. Again, we can try together where we're creating this branch that comes down. We create these elongated lines, and then we start to create little taps coming out of them. And this creates the real form to our branches. And we want to do this with quite a few of these guys. Some of these branches are going to be tiny. You can see this one here, much smaller than this, much smaller than that, but integral. Now we'll come through here, and maybe the branch is, because it's facing us, picture my hand as a branch, it's coming down like that. So this part back here is the root, and then it comes here, and then it starts to curve down, and that's happening here. And all you really see is the fingers, right? It's just the ends of the branches that are curving downwards. So that's what we're painting right here. It's not anything horizontal. It's just lots of little vertical markings which amalgamate towards the top and create that. And you get more of these towards the center of your trees. Okay, that's a lot of water on my brush. I'll try to use a little bit less. Sometimes when you have too much water, it creates these little pockets. And we don't really want that. So we'll be a bit more careful. It's interesting, water is great for your paints and your brush in that it condenses bristles and it helps you make smaller markings and it keeps paint wet longer. But if you have too much water, then it actually makes larger markings, because then you're just painting with droplets of water rather than pigment. And there's an in-between, right? There's a moderation. So far, I think this is all going quite well. I'm going to zoom you back out for a second just so we can see it from a bit of a distance. I think often as artists we are used to looking at paintings really close up, making sure the details are perfect, everything's where you want it to be, but then when you take the steps back, things don't necessarily always work together, and we want to make sure that they do. So when you're painting, make sure that you take steps back from the painting, 5-6 feet, and also recognize when you are looking at a painting in a room, you're often 5-10 feet away from it the first time you see it. So you want to make sure that it looks good at that distance as well and not just close up. So do try to look at it close up, but also look at it far away, and you'll make a great painting that looks fantastic in any area of the room from any distance. Okay, so from there, we'll grab a little bit more of that highlight. We'll work it into the tops of these sections. And as you get higher into the tree, you can actually interject slightly more titanium white into these highlights because they are brighter, they catch more light, even the highlights have less shadow on them. And then you want little bits of that towards the bottoms just so you have that proper progression of light, but it can actually add a lot to a painting and look really nice. So here, we're filling this out. And I think we could go in with an additional layer of highlight through these, to be honest, create even more depth. However, I don't think we're at that point right now. I think I want to see how the detail in the rest of the painting evolves before we make that larger commitment. Though at this point, I actually really love how this is looking. I think it's quite pretty. I think it's full. I think it has layers of depth. I like how the progression of detail changes through each set of trees. And so far, I would say we're looking pretty good here. At this point, I do think we continue moving perhaps downwards through here. I like that. So we're doing this hill, which is largely cast in shadow. You can see there's a little area of highlight up here. You can see the highlight through the bottom, but we get this real dark area in between, and that's, I think, the next step. So I'm going to grab the larger flat-headed brush. We'll grab a good amount of our sap green, oxide black, titanium white, and I think that's a nice dark green. Not our highlight, but we can apply that right through here. It's kind of in between the shadows and the highlight. It'll be a good bridge. And you know what? I think we could also use it down here as the base layer for what this is going to be. So we're using it in a couple of different areas, multi-function, multi-purpose. We love to see it. We'll add in some extra titanium white with the sap green for the highlight. That's going to go on top. And that'll be right here. This is initially going to look pretty bright on first application, but once you start to blend it down into the mid value green, it'll start to look a little bit darker, as you can see. And then I think we make it quite dark, so we add in a lot of oxide black with the sap green, and then we come down here and we fill this area out. The bottom of the hill, the area that has the most shadow, and then we work this into this area that protrudes. Just make my brush a little bit more damp to keep the paint wet for longer. And then we'll also just tap this upwards into those highlights, into those greens. Just make it slightly darker, a little bit textured with the tapping effect too. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Okay. Now I think we go a little bit darker yet again. We want this dark to be darker than this dark. I'm not working with a pure oxide black because it's still blending in with all of our other colors, but it is definitely getting darker as a whole. And that's what we want. So that's this area right through the back here. We have the top with the highlights, we have this middle area. So far so good. Now I think we grab our fan brush, and at a certain point you are going to need to add water to this because you don't want the greens to dry on it. So I'll just put that in some water here. This is going to condense our bristles, which we don't want for the sake of mark making. So I'll dry it off to the best of my ability, and then I will just ruffle the bristles back and forth like so. And as you can see, eventually it starts separating them until you have all of your little bristles again. This also helps you get the bonus water off of the brush. And now we have something pretty great. See that? Lots of marks, lots of impressions. I'm going to grab the darker pigment. I'm going to do lots of little tap and drags up. This is going to be for a grassy look. We are close enough that we will see a little bit of a marking and impression for the grass. And it's really, really easy to incorporate. It's just a little bit of a tap. It's barely even a drag. The markings will be more dramatic down here. It will be more of a drag because we are closer to the subject. There we go. We're going to be adding highlights and mid-values on top of this, so don't worry too much if it doesn't look perfect. Still in the early stages, but you can see how these are quite small and then these are a bit bigger. Again, I'm going to get that pigment off of my brush, which unfortunately means wetting this brush, but we can dry it and we can feather it and we can use it again very shortly. Until then, I think I'll create more of a mid to dark value green to apply atop a lot of this grass, and then we can get back to rendering the actual trees. So for this, we will grab our sap green, oxide black, titanium white. I'm also aware that sometimes I'm saying Mars black instead of oxide black. Not intentional. I just used Mars black for years and years, and just this last year I switched to oxide. But I did so because I can't really find Winsor & Newton acrylics anymore at my local art stores. So I've started buying Amsterdam acrylics instead, and I've really been liking them. But I did switch to an oxide black with Amsterdam. So feel welcome to use a Mars black from Winsor & Newton. It's something I use and I enjoy when I can. Also an oxide black from Amsterdam. I enjoy that quite a bit as well. At this point I don't really have a preference, but we are using oxide black in this one. Sometimes I will say Mars black out of habit. That said, we're coming back down into here with lots of little taps with our darker to mid-value green. There we go. Filling this area out, giving it a little bit of bonus texture. I think we go slightly brighter one more time. And then we will need to get bonus sap green because we have essentially used all of it. Good sign that we're actually doing a good job painting today, you know? When you use up all of your paint, don't get sad because you have to get more, or because you're using it, you have to buy more. Remember that that means that you've been painting, you've been dedicated, you've been creating things, and that's commendable. I think that's respectable. I think that's something to be celebratory about. So use that paint. Feel good about it. Okay. I really like this as a basic base. Now I think we'll start working on some of the tree trunks that you can see through there. We'll grab the flat-headed brush, oxide black. We're mixing it in with some of our sap green, a little bit of our blue, a little bit of our titanium white. But this color here really is about an even mixture of the blue and the green, maybe a little bit more blue, and then more Mars black. And this will give us a nice cool base for a lot of these trees. And you can start running them up in between portions like that of the actual larger tree to give it a bit more depth. But we want protrusions and trees of different sizes. So some of these are going to be a bit bigger, some will be a bit smaller, as you can see. We also want to make sure that they're not all just moving perfectly straight up. We want some to have curvature, And I think I'll get you a bit closer so you can really see. So give me 1 second and we'll do that. Okay, so again, we're gonna get a little bit closer. We will continue to make these larger vertical markings, some big, some small, some leaning, and I'm trying to have a lot lean more towards the right because that'll create leading lines that draw the eye inwards in the painting, and that's what we're really looking to do here. We can also do some in the real background, and we can do little branches and sticks and whatnot through here, but I think at this point something I really want to do is switch brushes to something a little bit smaller that'll let us maneuver in between these trees better. So we'll take the larger flathead brush, we'll just put that down, we'll pick up the liner, make sure that's nice and damp, grab some of that pigment, and then we find these branches and we say, okay, how do we work this up? Which branches are still going to be visible through some of the open foliage? And if you're questioning where the open foliage should be, typically the answer is just the areas that have more shadow. So we're not doing this over any of the highlights, we're not doing this over the entirety of the tree, it's just throughout little spots. This will give us a lot more depth and make it feel a bit more alive. We're also doing a lot less of it towards the top. And because these trees are so distant, we won't really do it there. We could do a hint, but honestly, I don't know that this is even necessary. If we do, we probably want to do it with a slightly less dark pigment as well. So you can see I'm just rubbing this off with my finger. That'll make it look a little bit softer, which you can do, or again, you can just switch the mix to be a little bit brighter, add in some extra titanium white, and then finish the larger branches, the larger trees, through here, which we know exist and we want incorporated, right? We can also do some branches that kind of go out to the left and right, just hints of them. Really want as small of a marking as we can possibly make for these, like so. And if you do too many and you don't like the marking that you make, remember it's pretty easy to overcome in that we just cover it up with more of the green pigment that we've been working with previously. So once we have a lot up there, we can also come back down to the grassy areas, create smaller portions, like so, like that. Remember, the greater the variety of sizes, the more it speaks to scale in general. So that looks good. Now I think we'll take the larger flat-headed brush, we'll add some titanium white into our other mixture. We'll make a mid to dark gray, so we still want it to be quite dark, but we want it to be much more gray than before. You know, it might also add a little bit of blue just to make sure that the shadows are nice and cool. Interject a bit more hue to it. And then we'll just tap on some of this onto our pre-existing trees. Now, I think mine was a bit too dark to like really see the difference, so we'll make it a bit brighter and we'll just play with it until we have a color that shows up but not too dramatically. Yeah, like that. Now we can just add a little bit of texture, and the idea here is we're adding a little bit of differentiation in the values into these. We're adding some spotty bits on the bark, so we're doing lots of little taps, sometimes a drag, just trying to diversify these applications as best we can. There we go. Not a big difference, but every little bit does add up and count, right? I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. Now at this point, I think we can also switch back to some greens and interject some more foliage on top of these areas. And I'm going to start with a darker green because we want foliage to be both in front of and behind the protruding branches. It'll look best when it is both. So we'll mix up a good mid-green, something similar to what we used before. We'll use our liner. And we'll put this in front of some of these branches. Then we'll mix up a brighter version, more titanium white, more sap green. Probably be akin to what we have up here. And then we can tap on even more of these markings. We'll work this green up into here too, just so it feels nice and cohesive throughout. And we'll have some that look a little bit darker, some that are a bit brighter. Variance at the end of the day is the key. I love the diversity of it all. So, good. Lots of little taps. And just like that, I think we have what we're looking for. So, we'll let that dry. We can also use the gray and the Oxide black to create little branches and tiny trees, ones that you'll barely see, but just hints of life. Also creating a wider variety of scale. So, there we go. Barely seeable, barely visible, but it's there, it's having an impact, and we love to see it. We can also break up a little bit of our new highlights if we want with those darker pigments, and we're just doing minute refining throughout a lot of these areas and subjects. Okay, I think that's pretty. We're going to move on to our next step, and for that, I think we'll get you a little bit wider. Okay, so from here, I want to work on the grass that we can see in the foreground, and that means grabbing a good amount of our sap green, a little bit of our titanium white. I'm just going to make sure that the phone doesn't turn off with our image. I think, I'm going to be honest, I'm terrible with this. I think it'll work now. And for grass, we want something more green, more lush than what we have at the top, right? So we'll still use a little bit of our Oxide black, but really not that much comparatively. We'll switch on over to our fan brush, nice and dry. Grab pigments on both sides, and then we'll come down here and we'll do lots of these tap and drag effects, like so. We want some of our grass to be a lot taller than others. We want areas to be more full than others. We could also paint in a little pathway, and I sketched it in, but I don't know that I want to commit to it just yet. I think we'll wait and see how the rest of the painting evolves and if we want that extra detail in there. But for now, we'll just work in all of these little bits of grass. The most part is a tap, there's a little bit of a drag. Nice and easy. And a good start. Let's, you know what? Well, we don't have much pigment. Let's actually move it up into the darker area, just so we get that impression of the grass. If you go over the bottom of the trees, it's okay. You can always just repaint in the bottom of the trees. But we're just trying to fill that out a little bit more. Now let's go even brighter. So more sap green, more titanium white, less Oxide black, you'll notice that we're also no longer working with the ultramarine blue in the mix. There we go. Now it's going to look very fresh and alive in the way that we initially intended it to. But we need to build up and get there gradually. As we start to run out of pigment, we can start working our way up into the hill, which again will have a lot more shadow, and you won't really see these highlights to the same extent. Then for the foreground, yet again, we go back in and we do more of these elongated markings. Make it full. Towards the back there will be less openings in the markings because it'll be far to the point where we won't be able to differentiate the individual little blades of grass or the clusters of them even. So we want that to be a bit brighter and a bit more full. And then here it can be more sparse and patchy, which can also be nice because it creates more contrast, makes the brights and the darks look more prominent than they do over here. And I'm just going to do a little bit more up. And you can see there's a soft, slow progression into the true shadows up there. But already I think that had a really, really big impact. Love how that turned out. I think we can take some of this pigment with a liner brush and work it into this tree, which is closest to us. That way our greens are nice and cohesive. I'm not going to do too much. I'm just going to add a little bit more liveliness and variance to this. There we go. I think this one now stands out amongst these in a great way. Let's go a little bit brighter, more titanium white. And you can see how we're not necessarily done with subjects ever. We work on them and then we take breaks and then we work on other subjects and we see how they all work together and then we go back to the ones we need to when we need to. Because it's all one big piece. And I think once we stop thinking about subjects as individual subjects, but rather pieces of this whole larger subject, things start to feel more cohesive, they work better together, and that's really what we're trying to keep in mind and how we're trying to paint as a whole. There we go. Yeah, I really like that. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying the process. Hope you're having fun. Getting inspired. If you're painting along, I hope it's going well for you. Again, I was really excited to get started with this one. Trying to work around moving can be a little tricky, but definitely trying my best. And once the move is done, everything will go back to normal in all of the ways that we like it. There we go. Maybe we do slightly more foliage down here. Just little bits. Nothing substantial. Nothing substantial at all. There we go. Okay. So, from here, I might just take the liner and incorporate a couple little strands in the foreground, trying to use as little pressure as I possibly can with the brush, that way I get the smallest marking. We're really trying to just accentuate a couple little pieces. We're not trying to create large strands, we're not trying to create large markings. We're just interjecting slightly more intentionality into that which we already have, and building on some of our favorite areas. Through lots of little taps and whatnot. Okay, get a bit more water. You can also do this with the fan brush should you want to. A little bit of personal preference. Painting, acrylics, all of this. It's one of those things where there are 100 different ways to do absolutely anything you want to do, and it's about deciding your favorite way of approaching it. So don't feel like you're doing it right or wrong if you do it differently. We're all just trying to figure out what works for us. A process we enjoy, a result we like. Maybe I do use the fan brush for a second. There we go. I think once we have the water in here, this will look really beautiful. Right now I think it looks a little bit too stark, but that's just part of the process. And I think we will find a middle ground we really like. In the meantime, I might make a slightly darker green again, something akin to the mid value here. And I might just walk it back a little bit. Just create slightly more shadows. Nothing too dramatic. You can also use washes if you want to settle it or saturate it. If you want to make it brighter or darker. Lots of little taps through there. But now it looks like there is a real shadow underneath these trees, and there's a real area that is receiving light, and both of those I think are quite important. So we're doing well. Trying to make this progression a little bit more gradual by splashing in some brighter highlights towards the back, because there will be openings in the trees and the shadows, and there will be areas, spots that catch a little bit more light. There. Okay, I actually like that a lot. I think we're ready for the next step, which could be this larger tree right here. We could do the water right through here. I'm just going to take a quick look at the reference photo, and you know what? I think it's actually the landmass like this right down here, because the water will meet it, this tree will overlap it. I think that's the easiest start, and we'll begin with a middle value green. So Oxide black, titanium white, sap green, probably akin, similar to the middle value we used there. Could be a little bit less saturated, a little bit less contrast towards the back, and then we could have it grow towards the middle. I'm going to start with the middle value though, as you can see. And then I'll make it a little bit darker for the inner portion where we'll have more shadows. And I'll also place this towards the back. We'll do a soft blend from one end to the next. We'll also grab a little bit of this darker pigment for right underneath it, because there will be shadows from all of these bushes and trees on the bottom of them before we get into the big bushes. I'm just doing little pitter patters and taps to create a less sharp edge. That way it looks more organic and natural. Then yet again, we make it slightly darker. We incorporate this into the backing right through there. Very good. Nice and easy. Brush strokes for texture. Might get a little bit more of a grayish green for this distant area. If we can get the value similar to the mid values or the highlights in there, I think I'll be really happy. So I think this is probably pretty similar to the highlight. It is perfect. And this will make the grass look pretty distant here. So as we move the grass forward, we want to make the values go from something soft to something stark. We want to make the saturation go from something pretty grayed down to something saturated. Like so. Now we have a good progression. Soft, stark, saturated, not saturated. And we'll probably go ahead and let this dry for a minute. Then we can come back in with the next color. But again, so far so good. We have a really big tree to craft through here. And because this is so close to us, I think we'll probably paint it a little bit differently. Okay, so quick little break there. I'm going to introduce the shadows in this now, and then I think we'll move on to the next subject once this grass is good. I just want to make sure that these feel right together. That way we have a better idea of how to move forward. And this is going to have a very similar value here to what we have here, and then it'll get softer as we move there. I think I'm probably only going to make one mix. We'll apply it in the foreground, and then as we start to run out of pigment and it gets softer through application on the brush, then we'll just put the remainder towards the back. So we have our darker pigment, we have our fan brush in the water, so we will just dry that off, separate our bristles. You know what, we still have a little bit of paint on there, so we will wet it some more. Your brushes can last years if you take good care of them. If you make sure that you are cleaning them off in between subjects. And you don't have to do a big clean. Here I'm just dipping it in water, taking off the excess pigment, and then drying it. Now here we're going in with our shadows, getting to be more of a drag as we get closer to us. I don't really care if it goes into the central area because we are yet to paint that anyway, and anything we put there will be painted over, so you don't have to worry about that. And now that we are running out of pigment, I'm moving farther and farther into the background, and you're seeing, as I do get into the background, these darks are not the same as these darks. These are a lot darker, and that's just because the actual pigment is stronger. We get more of the innate pigment. Here it's semi-transparent, it's thin, and therefore it's not as prominent, which is actually great for us. So here we go. Good darker grass. You can see there's a dramatic difference between this grass and this grass. This one obviously with highlight, this one not, but it's a good start. Now I think while we let that dry, we are going to be efficient with our time, and I'm going to work on the base layer for this. And it's going to be quite in the foreground, which means the darks will be very dark. It won't have too much reflective light. We're not using any of our ultramarine blue. We'll grab a little bit of our titanium white, but this is mostly sap green and oxide black. It is probably the darkest pigment we've used yet. And as you can see, it is so fun to apply because we get to work in all of this negative space, get a good coverage, just throw pigment on the canvas. And then as we get out towards the ends of our branches, I'm going to be much more careful, doing lots of little taps to create potential protrusions and branches, like so. Lots of overlap with past trees, but not a bad thing at all. Again, that'll just create depth for us. And because the values are so different between this tree and this tree, it won't look busy or overwhelming. It'll actually just look really good. So, just going to make sure that we have a decent application, go over some of these areas twice. That said, I talk about making a decent application, going over them twice. It's okay if portions of this blue are showing through, because that was something that we put there intentionally to make things look cohesive, to make sure that our painting works well as a whole. We just let that blue show through different branches. So don't feel like it has to be too opaque or too perfect. That's another benefit of the underpainting. I think often it makes unfinished paintings or imperfect paintings, imperfect applications look far better, more cohesive, just really, really good. So you have some bonus leeway to leave things a little bit more expressive, a little more flowy. Here now we're expanding, we're adding lots of little bonus branches. Again, quite easy while we just let this dry. We'll take the liner brush, grab more of it, expand, do lots of neat little taps, really let it come alive. A lot of these taps are going to be angled upwards towards the top because those little branches will be without weight. They'll be kind of reaching for the sky. Trying to create lots of little openings in between. Oh, this is fun. This is very fun. Okay. Now, something we're going to try to create a lot of is these little portions of blue sky you can still see through. We're going to interject more of them with that actual blue application later too, but we are trying to leave a lot in this application process. So don't overdo the initial taps. Go with a less is more approach, and then we can build on it later as we expand, as we feel it out. We're also trying to get a lot of randomization because that's how this will feel the most real in the end. You can see how this kind of works its way down. It doesn't go that far down in the actual reference photo. I'm taking an artistic liberty here because I think it'll look really good with this larger draping effect. Means taking some chances, but we can all make our paintings look a little bit different than each other's, and that's okay too. If you want yours to remain a bit higher, that's fine. No right or wrong. Just an idea I had while I was painting it. And I thought, you know what? This might just look better. Let's double down. Let's flesh out the idea. See how we feel. A couple hundred taps in. And again, it creates additional depth, which is, I think, the big benefit. It's kind of nice how this and this can frame this peak. There we go. So far, so good. If you look at this in relation to this, you can see a lot of hard work. Oh, this is so much fun. One of those things where we've been doing so much intentional painting and layering and trying to figure everything out, and now we get this break to just apply paint in abundance and tap and just work cathartically with our brush. So very happy. Kind of feels like a break. Though I really do enjoy all of the process. I think when I look at big green compositions like this, very foliage heavy scenes, I get excited because I know every little inch of the painting I will have fun with. It's a lot of repetition, but there's also a lot of variance. I mean, the values from these trees to these trees are different, the values from these to these, the application style. Even the way we're layering values, we're not going in with a mid value this time, we're going in with a dark value, which is not how we started either of the other ones. Now we need to be careful towards the bottom here because realistically we need to go back over this area. So I'm not going to spend too much time in that space. Though what I will do is I'll now switch to the fan brush. And this will only work with a soft bristled fan brush. Everything we've been doing tapping wise has been essentially with a stiff bristled fan brush. This fan brush, however, is special. It's, again, the one from my set, and we went back and forth on a couple different designs and ideas, but in the end, because I used to paint with a stiff bristled fan brush and a soft bristled one, and I would have to go back and forth, I wanted to make one that did both. So when this is dry, it's essentially a stiff bristled fan brush. You get the really small tapped markings. When it's wet, and I'll show you, the bristles really condense, and now you have these larger clusters, and they make significantly less markings and larger markings, which is great for foliage in the foreground, where in the background, in the grass, you want the really tiny marks. Here you want them to be bigger because you're seeing the actual larger pieces of foliage. And now I can tap in markings that are similar to the size of the liner brush. So you get a variety of taps in sizing. And I'm doing this because we added all of these little textural taps to the edges, and then this larger back area wasn't cohesive with it. So now it is, right? Now it all has those taps. It's so quick. I really liked using the liner for the edges because it let me work with the intentionality that I felt like I needed in that space, but I don't need that intentionality in the negative space. So now we're going back here with this brush, filling out those midsections and just making it all work together. So far so good. So far very, very good. And if you want, by the way, example, we can use this in our other branches. And we can use it to expand, and we can use it to create these bigger markings. We don't have to, but we can. There we go. Now, again, we were waiting for this to dry. I think it is fully dry. So I'm going to clean the fan brush, make sure it's nice and dry, make sure that we recreate all of those individual little ones, and bring it back to the application style of a stiff bristled fan brush. The drier you get, the better this will be. And we will remix the highlight for this. So lots of sap green, titanium white. Work those together. My brush still has a little bit of oxide black on it, so I'm not opting to mix more in. I'll grab this. Work it along the edge. Have it dissipate towards the back because we don't want anything too contrast heavy in the back or too bright, too saturated. So this is more of an up close situation. And then as we run out of pigment, we can work our way back. Just add a hint of texture through here. And then we have almost nothing left on the brush. Then we can go here, or we can mix up a less dramatic version for the back. But you can see just how quick and easy that was. We'll now switch to the liner. Grab more of this. Create slightly more intentionality in the foreground with the greens. There we go. Like that. So where do we go from here? Now I think we can continue working the darker portion of the tree down because we have our grass completed enough. So I'll grab this. We can make the mix slightly darker because we are getting farther and farther down. And we'll just create a nice little base. probably tap on some individual little foliage and texture. And it's coming together so nice, so quickly. Look at that. You can almost get lost in it. Feels like a real trail, a real path. That said, this looks a little wet. We should probably let it all dry, and then we'll continue together with the next step. Okay, so we're back. This is fully dry, and we're going to be working on all of the highlights. You can see through all of these miniature branches. This is going to be a very easy application. All we're going to do is take the larger flat-headed brush, grab some sap green, titanium white, a little bit of oxide black, make a mid-value green. We don't want this to be too dark. We don't want it to be too bright, but we want it to be very green. More saturated, more green than any of our other greens. So less of the titanium white Mars black or oxide black mix. We're going to make this pretty wide. We are going to take our fan brush, make it nice and damp. That way it is a soft bristled fan brush. So we have, you can see it's forking pretty dramatically. We'll grab these pigments, head back up, and now we'll work these greens in from the edges of the sky. And the idea here is we are working this from the areas that have light, open areas, and we're working it backwards to the areas that don't have light. And eventually it'll dissipate as we get towards the back because there just won't be light wrapping around and connecting with protruding foliage. So we do this towards the outskirts, we work it in, and then we let it dissipate until it's essentially not really visible. But if we can get those little textured taps that are barely noticeable, that also adds to the painting and makes it look a whole lot more interesting. So we're doing a couple of things, getting a couple things done in this. We can also make these in the shapes of branches, as you can see. All of the larger lines that we create look like branches. So typically while I do a lot of rotations, here I'm letting it remain a bit more together and a bit more linear for the sake of making clusters, branches, more harmonious elements. And you can see some of the branches are almost moving vertically down, some are more horizontal. We're just looking for variety. And then when we don't have much pigment left, we just tap back into the negative space. If we end up overdoing it in an area, we can always go back in with that darker mix and cover it up again. There we go. Easy, nice and easy. Also, now that we're this far into the lesson, I know that the only people who are still watching are the people who really, really appreciate these paintings and lessons. So I want to ask now, for those of you who are still here, for those of you who are dedicated painters, what would you like to see me do more on the channel? What could I do in these videos that you would appreciate that would make them better experiences for you? Is there a different filming style you would prefer? Is there a specific paintable subject you would like to see? How can I make these as enjoyable for you as they can be? Would you like it if I spoke a little bit more with more energy? Would you like if they were a little quieter? Would you like music in the background at the same time? I can't promise to incorporate all of the suggestions, but I'm always looking for different ways to improve and make these better. And again, if you're still watching, that means you're somebody who really does appreciate the content, and I appreciate you, and I want to make these that which you'd like. Also, for those of you who are up over on Patreon, what would you like? How could I improve all of this for you? Make you happier? Again, I'm doing a little bit of a Patreon revamp soon, where you'll be able to get this painting and other paintings monthly. So, what are some other things I could add that would make you happy? Let me know in the comments, and I will take all of it into consideration, and I'll do my best. Speaking of doing our best, I think this looks fantastic right now. I really, really, really love the depth, the texture. I think we add some additional highlight with more sap green, a little bit more titanium white. We're just brightening it a hint. Just a hint. We'll go back to the forked fan brush. Go to those edges. Bring it in. We're going to be quite careful with this to not overdo it, because that is easy to do, unfortunately. But again, if it happens, it's okay. We can always go back in and interject more of the mid values, the darker values. There we go. Yeah, this is really adding a lot of volume, life to it. Glad we took the extra minute to do the extra step. It's not taking a long time at all, but it's having a big impact. Really just trying to do it towards the outskirts, like so. And then I think we'll go in with the liner brush and double down on some of our favorite areas. Really just make sure that the shapes we're creating are intentional, have good motion, create the leading lines that we want. I'm trying to bring a lot of the eyes back down into the painting, making sure the edges have good coverage of the highlights. There we go. Honestly, I think we're doing really well. Good. Now there's another step that's going to make these trees look a lot better. We'll do it in just a second. And I'll also note that I'm adding in a lot of these highlights more towards the top and the side. I'm trying to keep this area a little bit darker. Because it'll have a lot more shadows. Okay, I think that looks great. For the next step, I need to clean my brushes and my water quite thoroughly. So, actually, you know what? I have a better idea. I typically like to plan these out, and I do, and I have this, we work from the background to the foreground. We do the layers pretty intentionally, but sometimes when I'm painting it, I have a better idea than I initially planned the lesson with, and luckily right now is one of those times. Okay, so from here, I think we're going to look at the river. And as you can see, it isn't a typical blue that you would associate with water. It's more of this greenish blue. There's some real grays in there, but I would say green is actually the most prevalent color. So I think while our brush and our water are still diluted by greens, now is a great time to do this, and then we can come back up into the tree. So for this, we're actually going to do a base layer. You know what? I think I'll put this right here for you. And we'll start with the darker pigments underneath, which is a lot of our green, Oxide black, hint of titanium white, hint of our ultramarine blue, though we want significantly more green than blue in this mix. So start off with something quite dark. We want to have room to make it slightly darker though, and we want a lot of it. I think this is likely a great color, and the application process for the base layer, as you can see, really couldn't be easier. We are just going to cut along the sides of the grass, work our way into the foreground, try to create little divots around the grass so there are areas where the water is working its way through. It just looks a little bit more dynamic if you have these minute interjections that also go upwards, like so. Then we can work that into the other side, down below. And then we're going to have a large bush in this area, so we don't need to cover that up. But we'll work with horizontal strokes. And as we move into the background, we probably soften the value a little bit, so I'll add some extra titanium white. Yeah, that's great. Start to bring it out, start to blend it softly. Probably more horizontal blends than anything. Just like so. The more layers we add, the more intricacies we can incorporate. But that's a good start. Doesn't really look like water yet, but it will. So just have faith in the end process here. I'm going to create some elongated markings, and now I think we'll put this brush right back through there. We'll create little pitter patters. If you zoom in, you can see there are highlighted areas, little speckles that aren't the white ones that you see, or the off-white ones, but there's this discoloration back and forth of something quite similar to this. And I think a mix between what we used at the back here and the dark color is probably pretty perfect. So I'm going to just mix up all of those colors together on the palette. I'm going to switch on over to the fan brush, make sure that it forks in the way that a soft fan brush would. We'll grab this, and then we'll do lots of little horizontal taps, occasional little drags, but this will create the look of moving water that's just catching a little bit of light but not an abundance of it. And you can also kind of go back and forth in some zigzags here and there to create a bit more movement in the water. It's a subtle start, but it will have an impact. Now we, I think, brighten it up just a little bit. More titanium white. Grab that pigment. Double down on the areas that we like. Really fun to watch this come together, isn't it? I feel like I'm doing the painting, but I feel like the paintings just kind of happen sometimes, and we go in with intentionality and we have an idea of how it's going to turn out, and sometimes it shifts and it changes and it surprises you, and you get all of these fun, different positive emotions through the process. And I'm definitely feeling that here today with this one. God, I was really excited to paint something that felt a bit more like spring. And we're definitely there. Okay. Now once this is applied in a way that we really like, when we look at here, we can see a lot of movements in the water, a lot of off-whites, colors of that nature. That's something I want to do, but I think we need to take a little bit of a break and let this fully dry. So I'm going to clean my water, my brushes, then we're going to come back up into here and add some extra detail. Then we'll come back and we'll add the detail into there. Okay, so we are back. We have clean brushes, clean water, which are necessary because we are adding a lot of these little opening highlights in between our branches. So we're going to create a lot more depth in here, create this beautiful sky to a greater degree. We are starting with titanium white, our large flat-headed brush, a hint of our Oxide black, but just a hint, and a hint of our Ultramarine blue. The goal here is to not make this mix green at all. We have a lot of green adjacent to our pigments, and we should dodge that to the best of our abilities. I'm trying to recreate the color that is in the sky. I still have a little bit on my palette, so I can use that as a reference. I think we need to make it a little bit darker. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Give this a try. I'm also trying to make sure that all of the pigments are very consistent, so there aren't some areas that are a little brighter, some that are a little darker. This looks pretty perfect. Now we will switch back to our fan brush, and this is something you can keep it either in a stiff bristled way, or you can make it more of a soft bristled fan brush. I think I will probably do more of a soft, so we'll make this fork, but not too much. That's a good in between. We'll grab our pigment. We'll head to the edges of these, and then we'll just tap this inwards in a way that feels randomized. Now I'll get you a little closer and I'll show you we can also take the liner brush, make that nice and damp, pick up some of the pigment, and then very intentionally work this in, creating sometimes larger openings like that, sometimes smaller ones. And the variance is actually going to have a nice impact. I often try to make them look pretty unique, and we can go back and we can edit, augment, change, build on the ones that we made with the fan brush as well. So again, it's a combination of the brushes and the techniques that creates something that we really love. Quite proud of how this is coming along so quickly. Little openings here and there. Not many once you get into the dense areas of the tree, but still prevalent to a point. It's also worth noting there are going to be more openings towards the top of the tree because there are smaller branches, less defined subjects. They just don't have the age that a lot of these do. Okay, and now we actually get to continue playing with that color, or at least a version of it, when we work down here into the water. And a lot of this is going to be quite a lot of little taps. You can see all of the minute markings, but you can also see some drags, especially when we get into the foreground. You can see these horizontal movements that are kind of collected and put together into these larger horizontal movements. But before we get into the actual applications, what I want you to look at more so is the movements in the water, the spacing that's between these highlights. So for instance, the whites in the water kind of go left, and then they go up a little bit, and then they come down, and they go to the right, but they also go to the left. And to the left, they get a lot more prominent, and it goes to the right, and then it goes to the left. But it doesn't stay together as it moves to the left. It starts to create breaks that are more horizontal. And we're just looking for those larger movements to start crafting this and the idea of it. We can also see that the darker area of the water here, the width of it, similar to the width of the highlight, similar to the width of the darker area over here. So we know that highlight needs to be in the middle here with about an equal space here and here. Different little spatial ideas like that help us figure out complex subjects, and that's what we're jumping into next. So, again, it is a big subject. I'm going to put this maybe over here. Hopefully you can see that well. Paint is going to get on the phone, but that's okay. It will not be the first time. And we will mix a slightly darker version of this color. So I have my brush, I have my titanium white, I have a little bit of oxide black, I have a little bit of ultramarine. It is slightly darker. Let's go slightly more. Just adding minute amounts, and I think that's a good start. That's a nice gray. Now for the application, we could do this with the liner, and I kind of like the idea of the liner just for getting started, getting the initial movements in. And again, towards the back, we have these horizontal little taps. But because it's so far away, you can't really see the taps well. And it goes to the left, and then it goes back up. And then as we start to move downwards, it continues moving this way, and then it starts to break apart. There's also this little darker area right under the grass, which I think is pretty notable. When I go back in with new pigment, I try to apply it into the middle of the stream rather than towards the edges, because I'll have a lot of pigment, and I want to build up the middle section and make it more prominent, where I want the edges to be a bit more semi-transparent and kind of create a bit of an optical gradient. Now we're working on this little area, which, as you can see, shoots off to the left-hand side. I'm doing this with a lot of little subtle markings. And then we're going to bring it back into the middle, because this area gets dark right through there. So there's a lot of just checking back and forth, reference photo and canvas. Here we're rebuilding a lot of their central spaces. Acrylics get a little bit darker as they dry, so if this looks a little too bright, don't worry about it. And if it actually is too bright, we can always go back in with that darker undertone and work that in anyway. It'll also start to make more sense as we get more pigment in, because it'll feel more cohesive. But at this point, it's just a lot of little taps. Get more and more prevalent as we get closer to us. Like so. Soon, this will look like water. I know there's a lot through here. I think this is the next brightest point, so I'm going to start creating it as the next space to work off of. And we'll connect it into the backing one, like so. And it kind of deviates to both the right and the left. And then as we start to run out of pigment, I'll just do more along the sides to deliver more texture and make the markings in the middle, which are so stark, feel less stark, because there are just more pattern in a similar way. There is more pattern in a similar way. Now as we get closer to us, we're also going to create actual lines. So here you can see there's a separation between the highlights and the shadows. And that's pretty lovely. I think we'll continue to do a little bit more. And then as we get towards this back area, it's less about horizontal markings and it's more about taps again. There's a transitionary area where you have both. And I think it's really starting to come together. It's getting exciting. I don't really have much pigment left on my brush, so I'm just doing markings to make this all look like water as well. Connect those same textures throughout. We can go back into the tops of these with fresh pigment. Make sure that they work in the way that we want. There we go. Piecing it all together. Lots of little taps towards the side. Okay, very, very good. Very, very good. Doubling down on the areas we like. You can see how there's a darker area right here, and then a lighter one, and then a darker one, and then a lighter one, and then a darker one. Really trying to keep that little dance back and forth. Now, we did talk about doing this with the fan brush as well. And with that, I'm going to dry this. Make sure that it's more like a stiff bristled brush. Really fan them out so we can get as many markings as possible. We'll grab this. And then we're going to tap in a lot of bonus texture, which creates markings that are so small we wouldn't be able to make them with our other brush, which makes these unique but also adds scale to our taps. Gives the water itself a bit more life. Trying to go over areas that I've previously done and just accentuate those highlights. And honestly, it's a pretty easy way of elaborating on the water. There we go. Okay, honestly, that looks really good. We can continue to add these highlights with the liner and build on that intentionality till we're happy. We can also switch back to the darker undermix and create additional separations again. If you feel like we've overdone an area and I'm just cleaning up a little bit of the splatter technique that we did with the fan brush just now. But I think just going back and forth with these, you quickly get something that looks really, really good. There we go. Sometimes one or two little markings like that can make all the difference. Good. Beautiful. Okay, so at this point, I think I'm going to take a step back and just make sure we're where we want to be with it and we're happy with the piece. Okay, I took a couple of steps back. I realized I still really like the piece, which is always the dream, the hope, the goal. And from there, I'm going to continue working on the bush that we have right here. I'm just mixing a lot of our Oxide black with a good amount of our green. We want this to be quite a dark base though. And this will be fun because we're covering all of the remaining empty space on the canvas. So we'll just fill that up. And then towards the edge, we'll do all of these randomized taps for foliage which expands in unique ways. And we will of course touch up with a more fine brush, but this will add a nice vignette to the piece, just as this vignette's right here. I think we can also make a slightly more grayed down version. So something still dark, but not too dark. And I think I want a tree right here. I had one in my initial sketch, like that. Just a different kind of tree. A lot of these trees are very similar, and I think just adding one or two other kinds for diversity's sake can make it a lot more interesting. We can also use our liner to add little branches. And the idea here is these branches can point the viewer's eye in and downwards. They can also kind of reach up and almost connect with this so that it feels more in place. But there are so many fun ways we can expand. And I think these little branches are typically something I do towards the end of paintings, just because I don't want to overcomplicate it in the early beginning, but they can really add so much. Beautiful. Again, we're being careful, we're applying very minimal pressure, we're trying to make sure that all of the branches don't look the same. You can add more of these trees if you'd like to, but I think I like that the way it is. And now, once this is dry, I don't think it's quite dry. Before it is, maybe we add some extra intentional details to the edges. Give them those individual leaves, because we are close enough to the point where we will see those. So I am painting those in individual shapes rather than clusters of foliage, which means I'm just pressing down on this brush a little bit harder to create a definitive shape. Much easier to see up here because it's against a brighter backdrop than it is down here, but I still do want to do it down here. That way the silhouetted shapes are still in line with the top silhouetted shapes. Now maybe, again, we take a break, we add more to these trees. I like these a lot. Make it a bit darker. Expand upon this. Just create little variances in the values. We can also take more of it, create additional bottom branches through here. I think we could definitely darken some of these values, have more standout trees through there. And we didn't do a lot, but I feel like it honestly already made a difference. There we go. That's pretty. Now, let's mix up more of a green here. And I think I need more sap green. So we'll just put that on the palette. Almost done. For the record, using a sap green by Winsor & Newton for however long I can, because again, I am having a hard time finding the Winsor & Newton pigments locally again, so we'll see. That said, I want this to be a relatively dark green, probably akin to what we have here, maybe just a little bit brighter. So we'll mix up our sap green, a little bit of our titanium white. I think we'll apply it with our fan brush, though I will make sure that it's more akin to a soft bristled fan brush. Take off most of that excess pigment. Tap on these protrusions, these highlights, these areas that stick out. And I think that the soft bristled fan brush actually does a great job of creating leaves and foliage in the size and shape of a lot of leaves and foliage. So it just makes the job so easy. You get the right brush and everything just comes together. That said, again, if you are looking for a new brush set where you follow along with a lot of these lessons and you want to work with exactly what I'm working with, you can get my brush set in the video description. Again, I do think there are only 20 or so left, so if you want it, I would recommend getting it sooner rather than later. But this looks great. I think we'll switch on over to the liner. Actually, no. We'll make this slightly brighter. Yeah. We'll add an extra layer of depth with it. And then we'll switch on over to the liner. We'll grab this. And then for the areas at the top, the protrusions, the more interesting ones, then we can just tap this on. You can see it's mostly towards the outskirts. And I like that. I like that a lot. Really feels alive, feels fresh. That was the goal of doing a real spring piece. Definitely got me in the mood to get out and explore. Okay, and again, we are back. We are just adding some pretty highlights to the tops of these protruding branches. Maybe a couple in here, but not too many. And remember, every layer of various values you add probably makes the painting look quite a bit better, gives it more depth and realism. Often with these trees, it just needs a lot of layers. So if you start it and you don't fully love the tree on inception, that's okay. It's likely just a sign you need to put in a couple more taps, a couple more values, really build it out. That's all we're doing right here, right? And the more we do, the better it looks. I have almost entirely switched to the liner brush because now we are just doing little details and something quite settling about knowing that we're done with the big applications. Now it's just all of the minute, fun touch-ups. There we go. Maybe a couple more up here. Yeah, I like that. Maybe we add some of this greenery to this. Just a leaf here or there. Nothing in excess. Can cover portions of the tree, give us a hint more of the depth. You can see I'm also using my pinky finger to ground my hand to eliminate shake. And deliver some of these important final touches. Really bring it to life. I hope you've been enjoying. I hope you've been having fun. I hope you are motivated and excited to go out and create your own rendition. And if you are currently painting along and you are close to finishing yours as well. I hope you love it. I hope you enjoyed your time. I hope you're excited for the next one. Again, I'm going to be working on a Patreon exclusive, I think it's a 16 by 20 inch canvas. Not too big, but I think it'll be a fun project where, again, we are recreating a Bob Ross composition, but with acrylics and adding more realism. I have a couple other ideas and quite a few reference photos that I'm excited to do with these lessons. So, lots of painting in the near future despite the move. And soon we will have construction-free audio, which is just so exciting, right? It's so hard to put down the brush. It's one of those things where I know it's done enough, but I could just do another little tap here and there. Too much fun. Yeah. Would like to say a big thank you to all of you for being here, for supporting the channel. To everybody who leaves lovely comments, thank you for the kind words. It always means a lot. And again, I just really hope you enjoy your time with this one and the creative process. Can't wait to continue working with you. And with that, I think the next painting lesson will probably be up on Patreon next weekend. I don't know if that one's going to be a Patreon exclusive video or another regular lesson, but we'll see. I'll also post the next drawing video in a day or two up over on Patreon, so you can see just us sketching it out, and it'll probably be 40 minutes of chatting about composition and how we go about those initial sketches. So if that is something you would like assistance with, or somebody to just do it with you, then that's an option there too. But thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the journey. I will see you very soon with a brand new painting lesson. And above all, as always, stay creative.